Welcome to the Future Africa. I guess that's my cue to do the intro again. All right. Welcome everyone. My name is Olemo Gordon Brand. I'm with Future Africa, and it's my honor to be hosting this forum, the second forum of the year. And particularly because of our guest today and because of all of you, Dr. Ahmed, welcome. And yes, everyone who is joining us, depending on the parts of the world you're joining us from, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's about to be a good session, and we're about to take a deep dive into some of the issues that has been sent out, some of the issues that we're going to be talking about pertaining to the need for Africa's leadership in the global order, or in the global political order, regardless of how you want to call it. My name is Olemo Gordon Brown. As I said, I'm a programs associate with Future Africa, and I'm excited to host all of you this evening. So as you're coming in, feel free, just drop your name in the chat, tell us where you're calling in from, and then we should be good to begin in a few seconds. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome to the Future Africa Forum, a seminar series that we do at Future Africa. What is Future Africa? To understand Future Africa and to understand the type of work that we do, I think my point of departure is going to be the topic that we're familiar with, democracy, right? And the aspiration to live in democratic societies. And when we say democracy, it implies that people have a say in the way that they are governed, in the way that they are led, they have a say in their future. They're not simply resigned to whatever is thrown at them, right? But they have a role, so to speak, in shaping their futures and shaping the way their societies are. And they can affect and effect change, so to speak. And with democracy in sight, Future Africa's understanding then is that for democracy to work, we have to have active citizen engagement. People have to be engaged, particularly us as young people who form the bigger mass of the African population. We have a more critical role to play in ensuring that our democracies are what they're supposed to be, right? So with our active engagement, how do we then engage is the next question, right? To engage effectively, I always like to quote something that our executive director says a whole lot, that you cannot change what you don't understand, right? And so the thinking behind the Future Africa Fellowship, which is our year-long fellowship, and then the thinking around programs like the Future Africa Ambassadors Program, and then the forum, which is our seminar series, is that we're creating platforms whereby young people can come, aspiring public sector leaders, people who desire to have an understanding in the systems that they want to engage with, can come together in platforms like this. We engage development experts, we engage people who have grappled with some of these issues that we're already grappling with or want to grapple with, and then get wisdom, get counsel, and then ask questions that we want to ask and see how they have gotten there, and also see some of their opinions on Africa's development trajectory, in the hope that with a better understanding of how systems are, we are then well equipped to change some of those systems or to build better on some of the things that are already established. So that is it briefly about Future Africa, briefly about the work that we do. You can always visit the website, look at some of the details of the programs. For those of you who are joining us again, welcome once again. Excited to host this forum, excited to host this conversation with Dr. Ahmed Ogwell Ouma. And I'll just do a small intro before we talk about what brings all of us here together. And Dr. Ahmed, I'll not try to talk much, right? I'll not try to say much, but because we've all received the bios, we've all received the details of our speaker. He's the acting Deputy Director General of the African Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which we'll be hearing a bit about during the course of the conversation. And for the past 25 years, he boasts of a wealth of experience in public health, and he's an alumnus of the University of Nairobi in Kenya. and the University of Bergen in Norway. Dr. Ouma he leads the strategic work and oversight of Africa CDC, and he also works closely with African Union member states and partners to achieve the mandate of the African Center for Disease Control, which we'll be looking at a bit as well. Formerly, he has worked with the World Health Organization, both at the headquarters and at the regional office for Africa, in combating non-communicable diseases and tobacco control. Prior to that, he worked at country level in the Ministry of Health of Kenya as a director for NCDs as well, and then the head office for international health relations. He has been at the forefront of advocacy and action to reform the health system in Africa, including the need to establish an efficient and effective response mechanism for disease threats and health emergencies. And I think this conversation is particularly timely given the pandemic and the numerous epidemics that we're just coming out of as a continent, some of which we are still hoping to conquer. All right, so I'm really excited to engage, and particularly on the theme of our forum today, which is the need for Africa's leadership, you know, in the global order. So we'll be trying to unpack what the global order actually is. What does that look like? What does that look like? What does the new global order look like, particularly in the world? And how do we conceive of Africa's leadership, or how do we conceive of Africa's direction and control in such an order? So I'm really excited, particularly for the topic, and also to look at it from the health, public health perspective, but generally in terms of leadership, in terms of our politics, in terms of our development as aspiring public sector leaders. And I'm looking forward to our engagement as well. So what is going to happen is that we're going to have a brief conversation with Dr. Ahmed. We'll ask some questions, some of which you sent before. And then afterwards, we'll open up the floor to questions. So make sure that as the conversation is going on, feel free to engage with the chat as well, to keep dropping your questions as the conversation goes on. And then we'll open the virtual floor to everyone to be able to engage effectively on some of the things that will come up. Dr. Ahmed, welcome again.
Thank you. No, thank you very much. It's a pleasure really for me to participate at this Future Africa event, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
No, thank you very much. Thank you once again. And before we dive into that very spicy topic, the need for Africa's leadership, you know, in the new global order, however we conceive it, maybe people want to know a bit, who is Dr. Ahmed? What type of work does he do? What does the African CDC do? You know, we've heard a lot about the CDC of America, right? We've heard about a lot about the Center for Disease Control of America. Now there's an African CDC and a prevention office. What is the mandate that you're charged with executing, and what particular role is Dr. Ouma playing in that particular endeavor?
Thanks, Brian, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is that you're joining from. My name is Ahmed Ogwell Ouma, Deputy Director General at Africa CDC. Now, let me start with the institution, then I'll finally give a quick overview of me. The Africa CDC is an African institution, fully owned and fully run by Africans, for the benefit of African interests, and with the objective of protecting the continent from any public health event. So we are not affiliated to any other institution that may bear a similar name. And there are many centers for disease control and prevention across the world. Just very quickly, there is a CDC in the US, there's a CDC in China, there's a CDC in Nigeria, CDC Egypt, there's a CDC for Africa. So really the tag CDC is very generic, and for the African continent under the African Union is Africa CDC. Our main mandate is disease control and prevention here on the continent of Africa. And although the majority of our work and what most people have heard about us usually rotate around health emergencies, disease threats, and our action towards addressing these emergency situations, our mandate goes beyond emergencies. And we really are for coordination of action on the continent. We are for setting policy direction, and we are for supporting our member states to build capacity and also to be able to respond effectively to any activity around disease prevention and control. So this is Africa CDC. We are young, by the way, fully launched on January 31st of 2017. So we're just about 6 years old. A creation of the Africa Union Assembly of Heads of State and Government. We are an autonomous institution of the Africa Union, which means we run our affairs ourselves. We do not depend on the large political machinery of the Africa Union to take action. We take action at the local Africa CDC level. And our presence is, the Secretariat is in Addis Ababa. We have 4 functional regional offices for Southern Africa in Lusaka in Zambia, for Eastern Africa in Nairobi in Kenya, for Central part of Africa in Libreville in Gabon, for Western Africa, it is based in Abuja in Nigeria. For Northern Africa, we have not completed that process, but it will be coming. This is our presence, a very vibrant group of professionals who are addressing Africa's public health issues with the urgency that we feel it deserves. Ahmed is the Deputy Director General. I've been with Africa CDC since September of 2019, so not too long and not short, considering the age of the institution itself. As Deputy Director General, I'm responsible for programs. This means that I'm right in the thick of things. Whenever there are outbreaks, whenever there are emergencies, wherever there is need to support our member states, wherever there is need to engage with partners, these will be my roles within Africa CDC. But I like to look at myself as an African, contributing to growing this continent's influence, contributing to strengthening the continent's capacity, and contributing to ensuring that we remain leaders, because I think that is what is lacking, particularly in the public health space globally. Back to you, Brian.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ouma. And you mentioned leadership, mentioned influence, and those are subjects that, you know, we're going to spend the bulk of our time today taking a deep dive into. But before we leave the person of Dr. Ahmed, we want to know a bit, people want to know a bit, how does one get to become the Deputy, you know, Director General of the African CDC? How do you get there, you know? Yes, the passion for Africa is there, the passion to see the continent have a different narrative in all sectors that you mentioned is there, but how do you get from young people like ourselves, you know, to get to your office and to get to serve in that capacity?
Yeah, Brian, there is every opportunity for young professionals on the continent to be on a path that leads them into into leadership in the public health space. Indeed, leadership in the wider health and policy space. The routes will be many. There is no one single route. Well, if someone had spoken with me, say 10 years ago that I will be at the Africa CDC, I probably would have said no. That is not the route that I would take. But life has a way of guiding your skill, your knowledge, your experience, so long as your heart is in the right place. Life has a way of providing that direction so that you are at a place where you're making the best possible difference for the people and for the continent of Africa. My journey has been quite mixed. Started off doing clinical work in Kenya, of course, at the Ministry of Health after finishing my education. The clinical work got boring very quickly, and so I went into public health. So instead of dealing with one case at a time, I wanted to deal with prevention and policy. And so I went back to school to do my master's in public health. And this is where the journey begins. That if you want to take the clinical route, there is absolutely nothing wrong with it. Design your education, your experience and skills building in that direction, and do the very best that you can in it. And we still need a lot of skilled clinicians on the continent. There is the route of policy making, which means you become a pure administrator, who will most probably be working either at ministries of health or intergovernmental organizations of different types. And then there is the route of becoming an international civil servant. And that means you are within institutions like the Africa Union, which means Africa CDC in this case, the UN, which means WHO, UNICEF, etc., or you're within the non-state actors space. That is, those are the NGOs. So long as you're going to be dealing with policy and community engagement, then that's not a path. So you choose the path that you would like to get into, and then you ensure that your education is right, you ensure that your experience is with the right institutions and doing the right kind of work. And thirdly, you network, you engage. There are always those who are 2 steps ahead of you, you learn from them. There are always those who are 10 steps ahead of you, you learn from them. And every opportunity that presents itself for you to acquire new knowledge, for you to be able to be exposed to new experiences, and for you to enter into a new space, new institutions, new kinds of work, you take those opportunities. So for me, it has been an interesting path. I started off doing clinical work, as I said, went into policy space. I went back to the ministry to head the Department of Non-Communicable Diseases, where I was doing a lot of prevention, whether it is tobacco control, alcohol control, diet control, physical activity, mental health and injuries. I did that in the ministry for, I can't recall, maybe 6-7 years. And then an opportunity arose because of the engagement that I had. An opportunity arose to go to the WHO, which I did. Spent about 10 years there. And then I wanted to come back to Africa because I think I'd done enough at the global level. So I wanted to come back to Africa. And when the opportunity to get into the Africa Union, specifically Africa CDC, came, I took it. I mean, there were colleagues who kept on pushing me to do that, and I took it. And when I went to Africa CDC, I arrived in September 2019, and COVID happens in January of 2020. So it was right. It was the right time to be there, and we did some heavy lifting for the continent. Very proud of it. And I think history will write the kind of things that we were involved in during that time. So there's no one single path, but there is always the space for you as a young person, for you as an African, to see how are you building your skills, how are you building your education, how are you building your exposure, how are you building your networks, and then you define the interest that you have and you go for it. There is absolutely no barrier to you reaching the top level. If Ahmed can be here, then you can be even further up the chain of health on the continent and globally.
Yeah. No, thank you, Doctor. Been taking a lot of notes on that. Why you mentioned coming back and landing in the thick of matters with COVID-19. We'll probably take a deep dive into that and some of the lessons that were learned and maybe how that has maybe transformed or changed the trajectory of Africa CDC, right? Because you mentioned that it began in 2017. It must have there must have been some foresight involved. Maybe you'll tell us a bit more. Was it a response to an exigency? Was it a reactionary to a certain situation, or it was actually a work of visionaries, for the center to be started in 2017?
The Africa CDC conversation started a long time ago, way back in 2011, when within the Africa Union circles, the policymakers were grappling with, look, we are being supported all the time whenever there is any sort of emergency, but we don't have anything that is African. So through many iterations of conversation, the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014 to 2016 accelerated that conversation. And it was very clear that although there was support coming in from the UN system, from non-state actors, from bilateral partners and countries outside of Africa, the one thing that was missing is Africa was not organized enough to be able to lead the charge for responding to the Ebola multi-country outbreak in West Africa. So in 2013, we can say the conversation was still small. 2014, when this happened, the conversation increased in pace. And then there was urgency for the institution to be put in place because we were suffering a lack of coordination, effective coordination across the continent. So our policymakers, the AU policy organs, made an accelerated path for the Africa CDC to be discussed, the statute to be discussed and to be adopted. It took a very short time. The formal discussions began sometime in 2015, and by 2016, 1 year later, it had been passed. 2017, the institution had been launched. So I would say that the vision was there way back, 2 decades back. The vision was there, but then action was accelerated by the pain that we felt when Ebola hit West Africa in 2014 to 2016. Now, fast forward to Africa CDC was small. When COVID came, and we can talk about that in detail, when COVID came, it was clear that the presence of Africa CDC changed the way Africa as a continent responded to a large health emergency. And if we compare previous emergencies, whether it was measles across many countries, cholera across many countries, polio, Ebola, when we compare with COVID, what we did, because we were there, we were organized, and we were coordinating, is completely unprecedented, and it ensured that Africa was one of the best performing regions when it came to keeping numbers low, whether it was infected or deaths, and in building the capacity of the continent to start preparing for any future health emergencies, disease threats, or God forbid, another pandemic.
Doctor, you mentioned a bit about how collaborative the work is, right? It involves, you talked of the word coordination, that there's a coordination of efforts around the African continent. And of course, it was salient that you mentioned that compared to other CDCs, they are at a country, or maybe a term that we use so much, at nation state level, right? So you mentioned the United States has its own CDC, the UK has its own CDC, China has its own CDC, but now we have a Center for Disease Control and Prevention for the entire Africa. And of course, when we're talking about Africa's leadership in the new global order, we'll have to talk about the continent as a whole. But before we take that direction, Doctor, we talk about leadership in general and development and politics. And of course, it's not removed from health as well. I just want to, out of curiosity, what does collaboration really look like? What does the collaboration and the work with the different emergency response systems within individual African countries, as well as the ministries of health, in public health, and all of that look like? And also, what do the funding mechanisms and contributions from the individual African countries work like? And what does that collaboration still look like within the African Union as well?
So collaboration is at multiple levels, and let me divide them into 3. The first is within the Africa Union itself. We have different departments, different specialized agencies, different organs dealing with parts of what will contribute to effective response to any health emergency. So we have very effective coordination within the Africa Union, where we engage with all the relevant departments, specialized agencies, and organs. Then the second level for me is the most important, and that is our collaboration with our member states. all the 55 African countries. And we engage with them primarily through the ministries of health, primarily. But many countries have what we call national public health institutes, or what you may call national CDCs. And these are agencies that are designed for health emergency response, not for the broad mandate of Africa CDC. For that broad mandate, we go usually to the Ministry of Health, and sometimes even beyond the Ministry of Health when necessary. So primarily it is with ministries of health, and we engage very closely with our ministers of health and their senior staff. And where there exists a national public health institute or a national CDC, we also engage with those national level agencies. And what we do is we ensure that the ministry or the national level agency has the capacity that it needs to be able to do early detection and effective response whenever any health emergency or disease threat is found within their own jurisdiction, within their own borders. So the third level is with partners, and this is now all partners, whether they are intergovernmental organizations, whether they are non-state actors, whether they are individual countries outside of the African continent, whether they are philanthropies or the private sector, whether it is academia or research institutions, all those are now partners. And that ensures that Africa CDC has access to knowledge, has access to experience, has access to infrastructure that we may not have, has access to resources, whether human or financial, and also has access to space beyond Africa. And each and every one of those three levels has a very key role to play in the success that Africa CDC has achieved, has a very key role to play in the success that we expect we're going to achieve in the near future. So collaboration is at multiple levels. The most effective collaboration will always be at the individual level, because it is Brian who will represent Future Africa, it is Ahmed who will represent Africa CDC, and at that individual level, we can then scale up the partnership and collaboration to include the institutions and to benefit the continent eventually.
Yeah. Doctor, in that line, still on that same subject of collaboration, of course, a big challenge that the continent has experienced for a while now has been some sort of lethargy, for lack of better terms, right? In terms of close collaboration economically, that means in terms of trade, right? Intercontinental trade. Of course, we have efforts like the African Continental Free Trade Area. We have all the agenda that we've set forth in programs and aspirations like the Agenda 2063 for closer collaboration at all levels. My question is, at the level of health and disease response, response to public health emergencies, what are some of the barriers that personally you've experienced being in the thick of matters and being at the zenith of administration of the organization? What are some of those barriers, to collaboration between the different countries, and what is something that we can do better at individual level as the member states?
Yeah. Yes, that's a heavily political question, Brian, but let's tackle it in a safe way. So I think barriers I would also divide into three. The first very obvious barrier is the barrier of language. And Africa has its own African languages, and Africa also has official languages that are generally non-African. And when you are able to communicate effectively, then you can collaborate more easily. When you cannot communicate effectively, then you cannot collaborate as easily. It takes time. Cultures are part of that. And in this culture, you find that this is the way to engage. In another culture, you engage in a slightly different way. So on the continent, we have thousands of cultures. We have 55 different countries. We have language group, at least at the business level, we have language groups that are now going into 6 or 7 different big language blocks. It means that whenever you want to engage and coordinate, you find that one must be able to understand the languages, one must be able to understand those cultures. So this is the first very clear barrier, especially for us who are working across the continent. The second barrier is capacity. For example, lab. When you want to do pathogen genomics and country X has the capacity, country Y does not have the capacity, but we need their samples to be taken to country X so that we know what we are dealing with. It takes a lot of engagement, discussion, agreement before there is that understanding, because a country's capacity is low and they will take time to understand, what do you mean by pathogen genomics? Why are you taking away my sample? What benefit will I draw from giving that sample? And that cuts across many areas of our work. Capacity. When countries have high capacity, it is easier to engage and deal with them in that way. So this is a second, what I would call a barrier. The third is in policy. When you're working across the continent, you have to work with 55 different policies, because each country has its own laws, has its own policies, and has its own practices of how they do their work. And at our level, we must accommodate that as we engage with the different countries. We are now in an exercise of harmonizing the necessary laws and policies and even curricula for training. And this helps when you get harmonization, then you're speaking one language, at least one technical language. When you don't have harmonization, then you're speaking multiple different technical languages. So these are the 3 big blocks of barriers that I will talk about: the language, the communication barrier, the policy barrier, and then the capacity barrier. These are the 3 that I will be able to say quickly can make a change if we just get it right.
Doctor, I'm thinking and I'm looking for a way in which we can take that segue into the conversation on the current and sort of the contours of global politics, right? And the global order as it was, and it's changing currently, and then what type of role Africa can play in it. But I think that a way that we can get there is maybe thinking about leadership in healthcare, right, as a way of easing our way into that conversation, right? And many people who might not have come into this conversation will be thinking, okay, Africa's global leadership in healthcare, and they'll be thinking COVID-19, we were looking to the rest of the world to help sustain our lives as per vaccines. I remember I was watching one of your reflections after the experience of the pandemic, and you were saying one of the lessons that we learned from the pandemic is that we have to build capacity to manufacture our own health products, right? That could be vaccines, that could be medicines, and all sorts of health products. And then the other bit of it that you mentioned was capacity. We have to train people to be able to effectively diagnose and respond accordingly to any public health emergencies that will emerge. So many people will be thinking, okay, we were looking to the rest of the world to sustain our lives. So how can we even conceive of leadership where our economic and technological muscle is weak? And I'll be playing the cynical person a lot in this discussion, Doctor, you'll allow me, and to put it mildly, where we are largely dependent on other people that we seek to lead. How do we conceive of leadership in such a space and such an atmosphere?
Yeah, and this is a very important conversation, particularly for young people. Yeah. It's a very important conversation, double particularly for young people in Africa. Young people are not the future. It's not tomorrow. Young people are now. If you don't get it right now, then tomorrow when you're middle-aged, it's gone. You must get it right today. So you are not the future, you are the present. Why do I say that? Look, leadership is all about influence. If you want to influence anything, you must bring something to the table. If you're bringing nothing to the table, your ability to influence reduces, and therefore your ability to lead also reduces. Many times I hear the narrative that, Africa is dependent on and Africa is looking to. It is because we are only looking at the finished product. We are not looking at the raw material that is required to bring about the finished product. And raw materials will be three. One will be the expert, and that means a human being. Two will be the actual raw material that gets into the making of whatever the product is. And three will be the technology or infrastructure that you need for the expert to turn the raw material into a product. So that's the triangle, if you want. And Africa has in abundance the raw material. Africa has in abundance the experts, the human beings who can be able to be turned into experts easily, and the human beings who are already experts. We have a population of 1.5 billion. We can do it. What we may be lacking and not having enough of is the infrastructure, the knowledge, the intellectual property for turning that raw material into an actual product. And that is the nexus where we should focus on so that we can be producing our own. It may not be everything, but at least a good chunk of what we need here on the continent. So let me bring that into the leadership conversation. Leadership is influence. Influence is to bring something on the table. If you don't have that influence, you cannot lead. Can Africa influence? Yes. Can we bring something to the table? Yes. Can we lead? Yes. Before we can influence and lead, we must organize ourselves on the continent. This means we must create priorities for ourselves. We must resource the development of those priority lists. We must resource initiation of addressing the priorities. If, for example, it is we want to make vaccines, then we must put in our own resources, our own money, our own time to build our capacity to manufacture those vaccines. Nobody else will do it for us. The beauty is, in the world, as soon as you start doing something and it is successful, you'll find a lot of interest in coming. They say success has many mothers, while failure is an orphan. So as soon as you start any successful enterprise, then interest, support, partnerships will flow. If you don't start, then it cannot be able to flow. So it must start ourselves. But how do we do that? I want to persuade all of you that the way to do that is to start from the individual level. I am an African, I am a professional, I am young. How do I get to make my contribution be felt on the continent? Don't look at the big thing. It is good to aim for the big one, but don't look at the big thing because very often it becomes a white elephant. You start something that you cannot be able to complete. Look at the smaller things. And let's look at an example of ourselves within the public health space and our experience during COVID. We today are manufacturing antiretroviral drugs. Today, we are manufacturing different pharmaceutical products. In fact, Africa manufactures 30% of its pharmaceutical needs. Unfortunately, because of policy practice and the source of funding, the antiretroviral drugs, for example, being manufactured in Uganda are not being sold in Kenya because of policy constraints. The health products that are being manufactured in Senegal are not being bought in Gambia because of policy constraints. So it means that we have the need for these antiretroviral drugs. They are being manufactured by our neighbor, but our policy environment has not made it easy for us to buy from the neighbor. Then we need to address our policy environment so that we begin ensuring that we can buy from the neighbor can employ young people, then we build our manufacturing capacity locally. And it will be the same across any area that you pick. So where do young people come in? Young people come in by asking the right questions. You don't go through school listening to the lecturer and you get your 98% and you're out. If you don't ask the right questions during education, you will not ask those right questions when you get out. Because there is always the difficulty of starting later in life. It is easier to start earlier in life. So let's ask the right questions as young people about leadership. Where is Africa placed globally? If we are there, how can we be able to adjust it so that we are respected as we are supposed to be respected, so that we are contributing, so that we are influencing, so that we are leading? We can and we have that capacity. We just need to be coordinated and organized about it. So asking the right questions is very important. Second is making the contribution at your local level. Many of us want to be the Deputy Director General of Africa CDC, while our local health facility is not able to produce service. Why? Because the local committee has been left to people who don't have the ability to guide it. And yet we want world-class service while we are giving it very small policy and supervision attention. We start where it matters the most, and then we grow that experience to go national, go regional, and go continental, and even global. So ask the right questions, make a difference where you are as you form those networks that we talked about earlier, and you can be able to get to positions of more influence in the country, the region, continent, and globally. So you as young people can be able to make that change when you start early. Don't start late. Now, let me link that to leadership globally, beyond health now. You know, when we are doing very well in athletics, and I'm proud to be Kenyan, and there's a Kenyan lady who's been breaking world records like it's not a problem. We are doing so well in sports. What happens? All the serious sports people, if it is in mid to long distance running, they will be in Kenya to practice with the champions. They will be in Ethiopia to practice with the champions. In Uganda, practice with the champions. If it is short races, they'll be with the West African countries to practice with it. So we attract them to us, and they appreciate that we are actually leaders. Why can't we do that in other areas? Why can't we do that in manufacturing? Why can't we do that in education? Why can't we do that in every agriculture, every other area that we have the capacity to be able to grow our expertise and leadership? We must be dogged about it. We build our capacity, we produce, and we attract the right attention. If we are always asking, you will never be a leader if you're always asking. You're out there, you want to build a classroom, you go raising funds from foreigners. Why would you do that, right? So it must start internally before we can be able to go out.
Yeah. Doctor, there's a lot that you've mentioned that I think we'll pick up on it slowly, and maybe when I get into the questions as well, some of the questions we'll be able to not necessarily problematize, but give the opportunity to shed more light, mainly in terms of our capacity and in terms of still our economic muscle. But Doctor, I want us to speak about the global order. Yes. What is new about the contours of the configurations of the relations between countries today? What is new about the global order, and how much of an opportunity does it present Africa? Where is Africa placed in this new configuration of relations? I'll just give a bit of what's happening now. Of course, generally people think BRICS now is going to counterbalance, right? Much of what has been Western hegemony in different sectors of global leadership, right? And now you see countries like Ethiopia, of course, South Africa has been a part of BRICS for a while now, and people think that, okay, now these are opportunities for African countries to realign themselves and have a foothold, you know, in terms of global leadership. So maybe just for a better picture, what does that look like? What makes the global order new, and where is Africa's place there, and what are we doing how we're positioning ourselves to make sure that we are leaders, that we are dictating where this goes for our benefit.
Right. Things are moving and quite fast, actually. If you look at the history of relationships globally, the last 10 years have been so rapid. It probably captures 2 centuries of relationships from previously, if you look at the pace at which things are, the changes are coming. So what's happening globally now is we talked about influence, we talked about bringing something to the table, which results in leadership. So 3 things are going on. Actually, 2 very big things are going on. One is the big table that we've known for a long time, which has largely been, which has heavily been influenced by Western countries, is being looked at twice. And that is why other tables are being set up on the side. BRICS you mentioned, and there are others. The ASEAN countries have a very strong push as well. And that's where Africa also comes in. And Africa is trying to expand its own table under the African Union. So the big table is not necessarily becoming smaller, but certainly there are other tables being set up. And on those tables, people are coming, different interests are coming with something, putting it on the table to influence and therefore exact leadership. So that chain is there. There are tables that are being set up on the side. Second is technology, particularly technology in communication. Today, you wake up in one part of the world and you can eat lunch in another part of the world, and you can have dinner in another part of the world. This means that the rapid communication that we have today has started to bridge the gap of opportunity and opportunity for influence. So today, a village boy in my village out in Kindu Bay in Kenya will be able to see things online that an advanced chap somewhere in Finland is also seeing all at the same time. Before, it used to be that those who have access to the knowledge will enjoy it for a long time before it reaches those who don't have access to the knowledge. Today, it is instant. Now, with communication being instant, it means that we have access to material that we did not have access to before, and certainly not in as easy a way. What we do with that information is what sets us apart. And that's where the new order comes. With the resources that you have, with the information that you have, what are you doing with it? And an example would be Africa's abundance of raw materials, mineral wealth, right? Natural wealth, trees and rivers and whatever, sunshine. What are we doing with it? Right? Most of the time we take the raw material and it is exported raw. And then the finished products come back to us and we pay 10,000 times the value. Meaning we are exporting jobs, we are exporting money, we are exporting influence, and therefore we are exporting leadership. So these 2 things are happening at the same time, different tables being set up, and then the ability to access information has become easier. What we do with it is what will set us apart from others. And I am persuading you as young people that let us start or expand doing positive things with the knowledge that we have. Instead of spending 1 hour on TikTok laughing at jokes, you can spend 10 minutes and then the other 50, spend it online, but getting information, getting connections that are going to help you as an individual, help your community, your country, and eventually your continent. We have access to this. It's just that we are not utilizing it well. And for the tables that are being set up, let's see how the next 5 or so years will go. We certainly will have a clear balance, if you want, of influence. And Africa needs to play a very prominent role in that adjustment, because we are a very big influence now, But tomorrow, as our numbers grow, as our skills, knowledge grow, we are the future of this globe. So Africa must be a very serious influencer on any of those tables that are being set up.
Doctor, yes, we need to. That is for sure. Before I turn the floor to the chat and to everyone who has come here, whom I know has very provocative questions as well. Doctor, I want you to look at your. I'm just going to force you to look at your crystal ball a bit. You mentioned that in the coming years we'll have some sort of influence globally. I'm thinking about the war in Ukraine, right? And I'm thinking about Africa sending its representatives to go and have some sort of peace negotiation like we've always attempted to do whenever anything arises on the continent, with varying results. And I'm thinking about the fact that largely we came back empty-handed, but there was a semblance of concerted efforts, right? I'm thinking about Europe, and I'm thinking about the European Union. I'm thinking about America, and I'm thinking about the coalition of North, of the countries in that axis, on that part of the region, right? And I'm thinking that whatever underlines all of these efforts has always been unity. And that in terms of sheer power, the argument has been made before that individually African countries have no bearing at all in terms of global politics, in terms of economics, right? That our economy is largely, when you're comparing China with the billions of people that it has, with a single African country like Botswana with about 3 million people, in terms of sheer power, in terms of the economy, it has no bearing at all in the conversation. So in the coming years, as you said, that we need to assert global leadership, we need to have a say. It matters. How do we not necessarily tackle the challenge, but how do we approach the task of unity? Because if we say Africa's leadership in the new global order, it assumes an Africa in the first place. What does that look like for you, and how do we bring it about?
Let me disagree with you first about our leaders going to Ukraine and Russia. In my view, and this is personal, has nothing to do with Africa CDC, in my view, there are three very big wins. One is African leaders organized themselves and focused on an issue which was outside of the continent. Very big win, unprecedented. Second is that they were accepted as special guests, both in Ukraine and in Russia. Very big win. And at the same time, it was the same route. You go, you fly into one, then you go to the other, then back home. They were received as special guests and listened to. Very big win. And third, they actually discussed, and by the way, I'm not privy to the discussion that went on. The little bits that we got out of the press conferences, it was clear that some very sensitive matters were touched, and the African leaders approached this from an African interest perspective. They didn't go there to take sides. They went there to protect the interests of Africa. So personally, these three big wins did happen, and we are aware that there's still conversations that are going on. In any complex conflict situation, you don't get results immediately. But for me, there were three very big wins by our leaders making that trip. And it's my expectation that we are learning from this, and we are going to be better in coming into the future. But looking into my crystal ball, how Africa can be able to actually, I don't want to use the word take advantage, but use the space that Africa is now being given by bringing something on the table, exerting some influence, and therefore some leadership. I see a very positive future for the continent. We have for a long time been consumers of other people's cultures, ideas, and products. This time, Africa is reorganizing itself, and we proved that we can do it as Africa CDC and the African Union during the COVID pandemic crisis. We proved we can be able to do that. So when I look into the future, I can see Africa learning from its mistakes. I can see Africa organizing itself better at the lower technical levels and at the highest level of policy making. I can see Africa redefining what its priorities and interests are, and I can see Africa actually defending these priorities and interests in global fora. So I have it's not a rosy picture, but it's for me a journey that we not only must make, but what I see and what I feel inside, it's a journey that Africans are going to make with very good results in the not too far future. So I once again challenge you as young people. This continent needs you to ensure that the little that has been done now becomes much more when you take your space into action.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Definitely the charge to us as young people, it's I don't call it a heavy one, because our forebears have borne heavier crosses to get us where we are. So I'll not try to monopolize the discussion, but I think some things that I picked interest, right? That we can have a sense of optimism. And of course, hope is that one thing we can't lose. We can have a sense of optimism on the basis of what our current leaders have done. You know, they have managed to come together. They have asserted their interests, and that is required for global leadership. Maybe the question of unity is something that we can take up as our generation. I'll open up the floor, Doctor, to questions that have been asked in the chat. And maybe before we go to the chat, any questions that we might have, you can use the raise hand function, and then we'll allow you to get Doctor's attention while he's still at his hot seat. So if you have any questions, this may be a good chance to ask Dr. Ouma. All right, Amondi, your hand.
My name is Amondi Oyugi, and I'm following. It's a question I posted in the chat, and I'm just for the emphasis. The current trend you see in Kenya is health professionals moving out of Africa for greener pasture, especially the youth. And I'm wondering if you're working on building capacity, especially when you talk around the capacity and nothing the capacity. How will this be really possible when the youth, when the workforce is finding every opportunity to move out of Africa? How is the Africa planning or addressing that issue, and how best? Okay, what are the comments of Doctor, and how best can we move forward with this new phenomenon out of Africa, especially the health workers? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amondi. You're breaking a bit with your audio, but what I captured, Doctor, is this: that you mentioned capacity building. That you mentioned the triangle, the experts, the raw materials, and then the technology infrastructure, right? And I think Amondi's question is around the experts, that much of Africa's capacity is going abroad, that every young professional in Africa is trying to see how they can escape the continent, so to speak. And yet we are talking about capacity building to assert leadership and global influence. So what is your view? How do we turn the situation around? How are we already doing it? If you're looking at it through an optimistic lens, and how do we maybe create those incentives for young people to stay?
Yeah, and thanks. You heard much more than I did. I could barely hear. But yes, look, every human being wants something better for themselves. And that's a given, especially if you have exerted yourself to develop a skill or a set of knowledge which gives you a nice certificate from a college or a university, then you want something for yourself. And the definition of that something better has been done by others, not us. Today, if I want to go and be a farmer producing food for my community, I'm looked at as a failure. Yet, that same avocado or orange, if you go and buy it in the streets of Europe or North America, it costs an arm and a leg if you convert it to your local currency. So the definition of what success is has been done by others. And some of the more locally available opportunities have been downgraded in the eyes of many. So that definition is already a problem. But nevertheless, we are at the stage where as an individual, I would like to do something for myself. And if I can't find it at home, I want to look for it outside. Very okay in terms of human action. Now, we have two challenges. One is, how are our governments creating opportunities for not just young people, but generally professionals who have a skill that is well defined to get opportunities? This is something that our governments need to improve on, so that there is more and more opportunities for us as professionals to get into the space of working within my country. If that fails, then of course, many will want to leave and go abroad. But on the other side of the coin, what we are doing now as Africa CDC, as we work on particularly manufacturing of health products, we are identifying Africans who are working outside of the continent and creating products out there, engaging with them and seeing if they can actually be able to come back home and lead the enterprise of manufacturing. This has had some very interesting results, particularly in Senegal. Senegal is expanding the Institute Pasteur in Senegal is expanding its capacity for manufacturing vaccines, for doing research and development, and they are actually having a reverse brain drain. There are Senegalese who are outside working in biotech companies and other institutions out there. They are going back to Senegal to actually ensure that there is expansion of the manufacturing capacity, especially vaccines manufacturing capacity in Senegal. So there are examples. Rwanda has done the same. Many Rwandans who are outside are going back home. The important thing is you have an opportunity for a professional to come back and play their role. You have an opportunity for a non-professional to be able to earn a decent living. You have an opportunity for whoever is working to have their families, their social system to be decent. If you can't get decent social system, then me and my family will carry ourselves and we go elsewhere. So it is work in progress, and we will be documenting better the successes that we have, because we do have successes on the continent. We're just not documenting it as well as we should. You are muted, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, thank you. So, Doctor, I was saying, I think that definitely serves the rosy picture that you're trying to help us adopt. Not rosy, but really optimistic, right? About our future and about our current prospects as well. I'll go to the chat. Okay, before we go to the chat, Sherry, you have your hand up. Please, the virtual floor is yours.
Hello.
Hi.
So, Dr. I would want to ask a question on the economical side. What's your take on the commodity trap that Africa has been forced into by the international market, setting its prices in favor of manufactured goods rather than the raw production sector? Also, how do we get out of it? Because asking Africans to do value addition is a long journey of building to reach that first world affluence, which again is a bit unfair since we've lost a few years to, not a few, 500 years to colonization.
Doctor, can I preface this question before you answer it?
You can do that. I was about to answer, but go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. The view that if you're talking about leadership, that economic power, that political power globally at a local level stems from economic power, and that where we stand currently, we do not have that economic power. And it goes back to something that you mentioned, that we are a consumer society. You mentioned one aspect of it, that we are mainly consuming cultures, but the other aspect of it is ideas, and the other aspect of it definitely, as Sherry has pointed out, is commodities, right? And that we don't look like we are getting out of that anytime soon. So how do we turn that around to derive the economic power that we need to be able to assert global influence?
I think it was Sherry. The realities that we have should not be an anchor for us not to progress. Indeed, those realities should be the motivator for us to look at something that is better. We have become a huge supermarket on the continent, huge, for goods sometimes that the quality is not where we would like it to be. And we know that, we see that. It is action that needs to come in between what we know and see and where we would like to reach. So I would like to propose that the way that we can get out of it includes the following. One is prioritization. Many times the consumerism that we are seeing is based on other people's priorities. They want to sell goods to us. So they market them and they flood them, and so we consume them. It is not necessarily our priority to consume those kinds of products. And that is why our traditional products, if you want, food is a good example. Our traditional foods we've discarded, and we are very busy chasing very unhealthy foods, but because they've been packaged and marketed in a certain way, we feel that is better. So if someone is giving you fried this or fried that, fast food, it looks much better than if you're being given a solid, wholesome African, natural set of foods because of the marketing that has gone with the fast foods. So we need to prioritize our things. What is the priority? We clearly, number them out, that these are our priorities. So that when someone is bringing products that are outside of our priorities, we slow down on even accepting them to be imported. We slow down on purchasing them. And naturally, when there is no market, then there'll be no bad product. This is one thing that we need to do, prioritization. And we have the capacity to prioritize because we are the ones who are feeling the pain. Second is education. And I don't mean education you go to school. It is education of the youngest of our children, right? When they're still very young. Today, if you go to most schools and you go to the alphabet, it is A to Z. And A will invariably be for apple. What has apple got to do with the African culture? We barely used to grow apples in our days. But there are things that will have fitted that A much better. I like Z being zebra because that is local. But when you start teaching the children values that are not ours, when they grow up, our values become alien, and that is why we continue consuming what is foreign, and we are hesitant to engage with what is actually ours. It is because of education. If you go to very successful societies who have kept their language, who have kept their cultures, they are stronger locally than societies that have consumed other people's languages and other people's cultures. And by and large, you cease to exist. And that's the reality. You actually cease to exist when you're consuming somebody else's culture. So that education needs to go all the way down so that when you are in school, you're not being told that, I don't know, XYZ was the first person to see like ETC here in Africa, or XYZ was the first person to see Mount this and that. And yet there were communities living around the lakes and the mountains and the rivers. It's the way that we consume our education and what is being taught to us that will make us who we are when we grow up. So that education has to follow the prioritization so that we are actually learning the right things. And if you do learn the right things, your perception to what your community's priorities are will change, and the way in which you consume your own products, the products that come from outside, will also change. It's a concerted effort that has to go all the way to policy level at government, and it is something that as an individual you contribute, knowing that the larger system also has to follow through with their policies and implementation. Otherwise, if we don't do this, our culture will lose. We will continue to consume commodities that have come from elsewhere, and that means we'll just be a huge supermarket for other people. But we can be able to produce what is ours. We consume it, even if we are tasting what has come from elsewhere.
Doctor, young people are really looking for answers. So these questions, I'm going to read some of the questions in the chat as well. Elizabeth asked something that I think is related to what you've just mentioned, but then she tags in Africa CDC as well. So I'll read out the question. It's quite related because it's still in that same conversation of Africa being a consumerist society as opposed to producing for export. And that knowledge, manufacturing and all of that. So it says, does local to global really work? I think this is in reference to something you said, that does local to global really work in an increasingly globalized world? It is clear, she says, that in a globalized world, local is imposed from the global. So maybe even some of the systems that we are trying to fight have been imposed, right? So the question is, what is the CDC doing to ensure that African scientists are in the fore of leading knowledge in critical health spaces?
Very good question. So, and I'll give an example of what we are doing, especially the lessons we learned from Ebola in West Africa and COVID. So, local is local. Global will always, and I don't want to call it global, I want to call it foreign. Foreign, because global includes us. Foreign will always try to impose itself on us. And it is our reaction that will make the foreign successful, or the local, which is ours, successful. So an example is during this season of COVID, you will recall that sometime in June, May, June of 2020, we didn't even have masks enough for us to be able to wear on the continent. While those who were producing the masks, they were keeping them. Then we started manufacturing our own masks. And the enterprise of masks and the sanitizers grew on the continent. We were consuming our own. Today, all that is gone. We are back to importing sanitizer. We are back to importing masks. It means that the need was there for local to contribute to global. We were manufacturing locally. But when the pressure was removed, instead of us taking that lesson and continuing to do things locally to contribute to the global effort, we decided, let someone else do it. Right? A lazy approach, of course. So someone else is manufacturing masks today. It's not us, yet we built that capacity, we built that skill, which we then immediately lost. Why? Because for whatever reason, we have assumed that what has been manufactured outside may be better than what we're manufacturing locally. So local works when you have confidence in what you are manufacturing, when you have confidence in your regulatory authorities on the continent, when you have confidence in your experts and those who are manufacturing the products for us. If you don't have that confidence, then you really have no capacity to be able to then talk about local contributing to global, because you'll always be waiting for the thing to come from outside rather than to come from locally. Second is vaccines. We had money, we had $3 billion on the continent looking for vaccines for COVID. We didn't have them because the production was not in keeping with the demand. So what we decided is, let's get local manufacturing happening. What has happened between this decision was made in 2021. Between 2021 and today, completely new manufacturing facilities are being put up in Rwanda, in Ghana, in Senegal and Kenya. Completely new. They are being expanded in South Africa, in Egypt, Morocco, and Algeria. And even in Senegal, they are expanding what was there before. So it tells you that in a very short time, we took charge and we said, let's do what needs to be done on the continent. Maybe we don't talk about it enough, which is a bit unfortunate, but something concrete is being done locally. Now, when foreign comes, it is our responsibility as Africans to always make preference for what is local. It's the only way to grow our strength, so that tomorrow we can be able to do more. If we prefer what is foreign, then we are not able to defend what is local. We are not able to grow the enterprise of what is local, and we'll end up losing it, just like we lost the masks manufacturing enterprise. Local works and local contribute to the global. Foreign is what is available a lot, but if we continue to purchase what is foreign without building our own capacity locally, we'll always remain consumers of other people's commodities. Local is what we need.
Local is what we need. Doctor, there's another question here from Elizabeth in the chat, and she's asking in reference to climate change. And I'm pretty sure that within CDC, you have certain indices, you have some forecasts. I have some picture of CDC in my head. So, Doctor, you'll excuse me. You know, if they're very well. But yeah, I know that there's a lot of forecasting happening because you have to anticipate also what might happen depending on current trends, right? So she's asking, with climate change increasingly changing the terms of interactions of the natural systems, you know, it's projected that new types of diseases would come to the fore. So what is being done now to ensure resilience? And I think maybe this is in reference to the CDC. What are some of the diseases we're anticipating may come with climate change, and what are we doing to assuage this?
Good. Yeah, Elizabeth is asking an Africa CDC question, which is good, not just the broader politics and developmental issues. So climate change is the second, in my view, is the second biggest game in town when it comes to health security issues going forward. The first is capacity. If you don't have capacity, anything small comes, it will hit you. But climate change is the second biggest. And of those that are not related to us as individuals, then climate change is the biggest. Look at what has happened on the continent just this year. Cholera has hit us very hard because of, the storms that we saw in the southern part of Africa. And that has spread. With very little rain, cholera is spreading. It's consumed now almost 17 countries on the continent of Africa. So climate change is very real. We are seeing malaria where we never used to see malaria. Rift Valley fever, yellow fever, we are seeing it where it never used to be there. And mark you, these are diseases that are being transmitted by insects, if you want. And those insects, they survive in certain temperatures and weather conditions. Now, where we never used to see malaria, we are seeing it now, and it's becoming huge outbreaks, meaning climate change is having an effect. Droughts, etc., are making it so much easier for malnourished individuals to fall sick, and many are dying as a result of that. So climate change is very real. What are we doing as Africa CDC? One, we are studying the weather data from 2 decades back, trying to see where the pattern is going. We are mirroring the weather data to food, where there is drought, hunger, etc., and disease outbreaks. We want to see what are those pointers that tell us something is coming years in advance. And the beauty with data is that when you study it carefully and you lay one type of data over the other, it actually gives you the ability for prediction. And our modeling, which Brian you're referring to, is improving every day. Before, African countries never used to model. Today we are modeling with support from very key universities and institutions on the continent of Africa. So that's one thing we are doing, building our own capacity to study our data and be able to model and predict. And we are getting there. So this is one thing. Second is we have also been studying, since from the 50s, the pattern of disease threats, health emergencies that we've been seeing on the continent. And we now can be able to tell you what may come, not as a result of modeling, but purely as a result of the cycles. We know when it rains, and then when it's starting to get warm, Rift Valley fever will come, right? We know that when it rains and sanitation is not very good, cholera will come. So there are things that tell us in cycles that this is going to come, and we are using that data to prepare our countries. And the continent, by the way, has a very beautiful signal that it tells us this type of disease will be on this side, that type of disease will be on the other side. So our experts are studying that data and creating what we like to call the African Disease Atlas. The third thing that we are doing is we are mobilizing internal resources. With that information, we are going to country by country, especially the ones that are prone to all these disease threats, and particularly those that are related to climate change. We are going to them and saying, look, this is what you're going to expect in the next so long. Let's prepare, and this is the way to prepare it. Then as Africa CDC, we provide support to that country, build the capacity of its experts, build the numbers, and then you're better prepared. You don't end up being hit by a big health event, public health event. So we are doing the practical things of ensuring that we can predict, we have the cycles, we have the capacity at Africa CDC, then we build the capacity at member state level, and then we prepare and wait when it comes, we arrest it before it becomes big. It's a very detailed, tedious process, but that is why we have the Africa CDC, that is why we have the national level public health institutes.
Yeah, looks like it's a lot of work you're all doing there. I think many people should be looking out when you need more hands. Definitely, we'll be looking out for the calls to come and see what role they can play.
For sure,
so we're at 1 hour 30 minutes, but it looks like a man on. So we'll keep you here for some more minutes to still address.
Let's do a maximum of another 10, because I have at a quarter to the hour I have another function, and I need 5 minutes to prepare. So maximum 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. So there is a question here from clearly a patriot of Kenya, and he's asking something about how we can address challenges related to job creation, and bridging the digital divide. You mentioned how we can leverage technologies and positioning. He said Kenya, I'm thinking Africa now, as a leading force in the emerging global order. So maybe job creation and the shortage or the technological deficit, you have to call it that.
Yeah, so I don't know who that is, but let him or her know that I used to be Kenyan. These days I'm an African. So when I look at the continent, I see 55 countries, although when it is time for vacation, I'll always be in Kenya. So let me give an example with a very low-hanging fruit and how we create jobs that are making a difference immediately. Community health workers. For a long time, the assumption has been it will be a retired somebody or a semi-literate somebody in the community that will be using for community health work. Our Bingwa initiative has shown that we change that. Africa CDC has a Bingwa initiative. Bingwa is the Swahili word for champion. And these are young people. And I think now we are at 300 or thereabout. We want 100 in each region. We'll reach 500 across the continent and hopefully more in the future. We get young people, prepare them, train them and prepare them on the ways of Africa CDC, and then release them into the community. Remember, Africa is what, 60% youth? So if you want to make a difference immediately, you must involve the youth. And the way to involve the youth is to create opportunities for them to work comfortably. And I don't want to call it job opportunity, but yes, where you have an income, you focus on the work that you need to do. Let's link that to technology. A community health worker, the old model that we had, would collect their material on paper. And then once a week or once every 2 weeks, sometimes once a month, they will go and engage with the health facility where they are assigned. And so it means you're getting your data 1 month later. Now the data is coming very slowly. Today, what we're doing at Africa CDC, we have the digital transformation strategy, the Africa CDC digital transformation strategy, where one of the flagship projects is to turn every community health worker into a data transmitter in real time. When they go to village X into homestead Y, and they find a child has a particular set of signs and symptoms, illness, they put it up into their gadgets, and it is transmitted to the database immediately, so that someone sitting at the database can literally every minute tell you what's happening across the country. What does that mean? It means the community health worker has a job. It means those who are developing our data infrastructure have jobs. That means we are going to have those who are analyzing that data. We are going to have those who are going to use the analyzed data to turn it into a policy document. It will be a chain of jobs that are being created. There will be those who are servicing the gadgets that we need, those who are training the community health workers, etc. Jobs are created at the local and at the community level, just by ensuring that technology is meeting the needs of the community and broadening the definition of community health worker, not to be someone in the village who is old, but it should be someone in the community, irrespective of where the community is, including in cities. We want someone in the community who can be able to engage with the community. If the community is largely youthful, then you want a youthful person to be the one who is linking with the community. So job creation is at the center of Africa CDC's innovative ideas and innovative flagship projects, so that we ensure that we are covering all three sides, the side of job creation, the side of community engagement, and the side of disease prevention and control.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Doctor. For today, Doctor, we may have to call you back from the look of we may have to invite you back for a round 2 of this forum, still on the same topic, because there have been so many questions, but I'll just give you the chance for the final few minutes. I'm still going back to the triangle that you mentioned, right? How do we lead? You have to have influence. Leadership is asserting influence, and you have to bring something to the table. And you said, as Africa, we have there has to be the triumvirate of factors working together: the raw materials, the experts, and the infrastructure. We haven't had time to go into in depth in all of them, but the experts are here. I want to believe, Doctor. They're the ones on this call. They're the people who you've been charging the entire time to take up that mantle of leadership. So maybe a few final comments for them before we invite you back to again engage with them deeper on some of the issues they're curious about.
No. I'm Future Africa. Invite me back. Mudhoni, I hope she's online. Will always be a very good link for this. So let me start with what I feel is the most important conversation today. Then I'll do a quick summary. That Africa CDC continues to expand its presence on the continent. And even today, there are a few positions that we have advertised. If you go to Africa Union Careers portal, you will see what we have there. If we are going to advertise off the portal with one of our implementing partners, we'll always be sharing that on our social media platforms. And personally, I like to ensure that you are updated whenever there is an opportunity. We want young Africans to come and join Africa CDC. And by the way, Africa CDC is the youngest public health institution in the world. We are very proud of that, and we want to keep it the youngest. So you need to join AU Careers portal. You see what is with Africa CDC, come and join us. We'll be putting up more in the coming weeks. This is one very important piece of information I wanted to share. Now, let me summarize what will be my message today. One is, please be an African. And being an African doesn't mean that you must be in Africa. No. It means that in here, you need to be an African, taking care of our interests wherever it is that you are. And our interest, taking care of our interests, does not mean that you put down someone else's. No. If you're going to have to put down someone else's for yours to look like it is risen, then yours is not risen. Let's focus on getting our interests up as Africans wherever it is that we are. So this is one, just be an African. Second is the time to make a difference was yesterday for all of us. But today is still as good. Let's not wait for tomorrow. So whatever you can be able to do in your local space, please do it. Don't wait to become the Director General, Deputy Director General of Africa CDC to do something. No, do it now. Because what you do is actually what is going to make a difference to create that path that we were talking about. And the one thing that we are very poor at in Africa is documenting. And I'm challenging Future Africa that we need to have more of our materials being published. Let's get them out there, even if it is just pieces of writing on the website of Future Africa. Let our young people document their thoughts. Let them document their experiences. Document as much as you can. In academic terms, we say get published. But in our case, we don't want you to just get published. We want your thoughts, your ideas that you write and publish out there, that you speak and record and share out there. Let it be something that will make a difference for this continent. So let's take action wherever it is that we are. Finally, for me, is we must grow our local partnerships. Many times when we talk about partnerships, we are thinking of the rich guy who comes from another part of the world. We are thinking of the rich country who's supporting your country. These are fine, but the best partnership is the one that we build locally. In your own community, how are the partnerships working? Within our own countries, how are we bringing together those who can be able to contribute? It doesn't have to be money. It can be expertise. It can be infrastructure. It can be space. It can be time. It can be money. How are we doing that partnership locally? And we as Africa CDC, one of the pillars of the new public health order for us is domestic financing of our activities. That governments put in money from taxes, private sector make their contribution because they are doing business within the community, and individual institutions and individual experts contribute their thinking, their expertise, and their time to something that is of public good within your own country. Local partnerships is where you need to start. And as I said earlier, success has many mothers. As soon as something is looking successful, partners from outside will pour in and want to be part of that success. If it is failing, that's a different matter. But let's make sure that we are actually starting the partnerships locally before we expand and we go out. Finally, Africa CDC is an African institution. You and I are the ones who are going to make it even better than it is today. So make time. If you're interested in Africa CDC, see that portal, come and join us, make your contribution. Be an African. Thank you very much for listening today.
Thank you. Asante sana, Doctor. I'm not going to try to rehash anything you've said. And thank you very much for your time. Thank you for all the counsel and the wisdom. We're definitely looking forward to having you back here. I'm just going to close on something that I've seen Doctor say before. He says a lot that our real wealth rather, is our health. So for all of us who came to take care of ourselves, and let's take the charge, the counsel, and the opportunities that have been shared also seriously. And above all, as Doctor said, let's be Africans. Thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you.